Hey everybody, Steve here with Gear Stuff and Things, and today on the channel I'm going to talk to you about my process for bass mixing in more dense mixes. So come along with me and let's get into some bass stuff. All right, so as most folks know out there, bass is a bit elusive when it comes to mixing. It can also be a little bit tricky, and it's kind of hard to find the proper space for it sometimes. And that's no surprise if you're someone who's made the attempt to do it. You want it to have a lot of low-end presence, you want it to have some definition, but in some instances, particularly with more aggressive music, you want it to have a little bit of dirt and aggression and grit. So I'm going to show you how I approach doing that with my mixes so that maybe it will inform your mixes. Now, you don't have to have the same plugins as me to achieve this. You can use some kind of facsimile of it or some version of these things. But let's go ahead and jump into the DAW and I will show you exactly what I do to my mixes pertaining to bass mixing. Also, just heads up, 2 stereo guitar tracks left and right, 2 bass tracks, 1 clean, 1 dirty. We'll talk about that in a moment. And just some MIDI drums in stereo. Yeah, I didn't record real drums or do anything too crazy here. Just did some simple programming and yeah, just to hear the example. So let's hear what we have in the DAW and then we'll get into all of the, chopping it up and stuff. All right, so here we go. So let's check out the bass stuff. So like I said, 2 stereo guitar tracks. We also have 2 bass tracks, 1 clean, 1 dirty. Let's hear just the cleaner of the 2 by itself. And we'll do it without any of the processing. So here is that. So as you can hear, it's a bit of a more throaty, almost kind of nasally bass tone, but it is cleaner and a little bit more mid and low focused. And yeah, it sounds nice. It's a nice clean bass tone. There is a little bit of grit there, but it's mostly coming from just how much attack is happening in the guitar itself with the pick. So I'm going to start running you through what I do with EQ And then we will go to our dirty bass. So let's start messing with some EQ here. So on this track, I have 2 EQs, which I'll explain momentarily, 1 compressor, and I have an NSL channel, which is just kind of emulating a nice vintage console. So that's something I tend to add to a lot of stuff, just to give it a nice character and kind of a harmonic presence. You know, it's unique. But anyways, let's jump into the first EQ. So as you can see here, I've cut out some low, and you would think that probably doesn't make much sense considering we're mixing bass, but there are some sub-frequencies and things that just really don't do anything good for our mix. And we can hear those here because the FabFilter Pro Q will let you isolate things and listen to them individually. So let's hear just the area I'm cutting out. And that may not be very audible in YouTube or on your cell phone if that's what you're watching on, but if you're watching on a nice system, you should have been able to hear that there's some sub-frequency stuff happening there. That is something that once you get enough of it in the mix, it's just going to muddy things up and start to get, you know, a tricky thing going on with separating the kick and low end and all that stuff from the bass itself. So we're moving some of that out and just cleaning it up a bit. I've also gone through and removed a bit of stuff at 162, and I did this kind of by ear, but you can kind of do the same. You just kind of look at the peak frequency. So let's have a look at the analyzer with the bass playing. You can kind of see that there's a little bit of peaking happening somewhere in this area. I just kind of use the isolator to take out the thing that sounds the most gnarly to me, that doesn't really help anything. All right. And over here, I've done a bit of a high cut. You can kind of ignore these. I didn't mean to click those, but they're there and I haven't gotten rid of them. So there they are. Anyhow, cut out anything in the high frequency that was kind of harsh and annoying and not really that audible. So let's hear that. So just a little bit of clack and noise happening there, getting your fieldy bass tone on, basically. I've taken that stuff out. Don't worry, some of that's going to come back with the dirty track, but I didn't want it in the primary track because I want this to kind of be the low end focus. All right, so that is EQ number 1 on my clean bass track. Now let's bring in the second EQ. And you could probably do the same thing within the singular EQ. For some reason, I just feel more comfortable doing it with separate ones. So in the second EQ here, I have a bit of a bass shelf. So we've got some stuff happen, bringing some sub-frequency stuff back in, getting a little bit of that, but we're also still carving out where we were before and, you know, not really losing anything, but, you know, it's helping out. It's helping out a bit. So we've also gone and chopped out some of that gross stuff that hangs out right around 1200K or 1200 hertz. Sorry, I don't know why I said K. Sorry, faux pas in the audio world, but that's what I'm cutting out. And I did a little bit of cutting over here too, still around the same area, but this is just like harsh, kind of hissy, you know, beehive noise. Doesn't really help anything. So that's the combination of things. So let's hear it without. And with. Now you may think to your ear, like without it, it sounds a little bit bigger. Yeah, it does. But we want it to fit in a mix, not just sound good by itself. The tone by itself sounds great, but again, mix stuff, we need it to feel good in the mix. So we can kind of bring some of that back. I will tell you that I've also boosted the output volume a little bit here on this EQ to bring back a couple of decibels that was lost from pulling things out of the mix. So let's go to the compressor. Now I am using this they call it a Puig Child, but it's essentially a Fairchild compressor copy, and some pretty basic compression going on. So let's check that out. So I'm going to input gain around 12. The threshold is around 1. Just kind of slapping it a bit. Time constant set to 1. I didn't do anything to really increase the output as I'm mixing in another bass track, so it's not necessary for me to really push this one a lot. I just want things to seem a little more even with the notation and the dynamics to have a little bit more equality ultimately. So here's without. As you can hear, it just kind of slightly brings some things to the surface. And over here, we have this NSL channel, and I have it set to kind of emulate an SSL vibe. And this is just a channel strip. It's just, think of it as a single channel on an SSL console. And it's just adding some harmonic content and a little bit of grit. So let's check this out. I'm going to turn up the drive just a tad bit. Give it a little more care. Like here, it doesn't do a ton, but it definitely helps add a little bit of life to it. So that is our clean bass tone. Let's move on to our dirty bass tone. So our dirty bass tone is as follows. So let's hear just the dirty on its own. Very gnarly, right? Super aggressive, super gnarly sounding, as I put it, and a little quieter. Now let's hear what that does for our clean bass tone if we put them together. So what we have now is all the clarity of a cleaner playing bass, and then the dirt and aggression of the dirty one. But let's talk about what's happening on the dirty bass and what I'm doing exactly there. So yet another EQ. And with this one, I have cut out, again, a lot of low end up until about 60 hertz. Again, this track isn't really there for the bass, it's there for the attack and the grit. So I've also kind of messed with some peaking points there around 519. It's going to be different with your bass because each bass is going to have a different characteristic, or whatever preamp or sort of amp you use to get your audio into your DAW is going to affect that. So that's what I needed to happen there. Here I have just cut out some of that super gnarly, not in a good way gnarly, noise that comes from distorted things. So let's hear that on its own. Isn't it weird that that sound is in a lot of recordings because people don't think to remove it, especially prior to the digital age. It wasn't as easy to remove specific things like that. So all of that weird B noise and hiss is still there. Either way, I've taken it out. I've also shelved off the low or the high end here, just taking out stuff that doesn't need to be there. But there is still plenty of attack there, as you can see. All right, so we're going to leave that alone and then have a look at this. Same thing as last time. Running one of these SSL channels on there just to give it some life. Gives a little more added harmonic content. Now, the real magic, so to speak, of my bass trickery when it comes to the dirty bass sound is here in the mix bus. So I have created a bus, and in that bus, I have my ace in the hole, the bit crusher. Now, the bit crusher is not there to sound bit crushed. It's just there for harmonic content and bass stuff. So let's turn it off, and my other thing here in the bow. We'll just do it the easy way. I'll turn the whole bus off. So here is the bass without the bus. A little less ballsy, a little less grit, a little less in your face. So let's put the bus back in, and then I'll talk to you about what I got going on. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to do the same thing. It's doing so much work on its own. Anyhow, let's talk about it. So, bit crusher. I don't know if you saw my video on the guitar stuff I did last week, but similar idea, different settings, of course. So I've gotten the resolution up to 24-bit. I don't want to degrade the sound here. I want artifacts added to the sound. I've changed it to the wrap setting for the waveforms. As you can see, it's kind of a weird spaceship looking thing going on, maybe a bat signal type of thing. I don't know, I'm an idiot. Drive, I've got it up at 18 decibels. So it's pretty hot. And I'm running it at 36%. I usually run somewhere between 30 and 35, 36. I don't want to completely saturate the tone. I just want it to kind of be there to add a little emphasis and oomph. And then after that, I'm using Saturn, which is FabFilter's saturation plugin. So we're just adding more dirt. So let's hear it with the bit crusher without the Saturn. Without the bit crusher. With the bit crusher. Now let's add the Saturn into it. We're in pretty aggressive territory. Now let's talk a little bit about what I'm doing with the Saturn. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you don't have to have the same plugins. If you want some sort of saturation, the idea here is just to kind of add dirt. A bit crusher of any kind will work for you. Using an overdrive or any sort of distortion in parallel in your mix bus with bass will achieve similar results. If you have any sort of tape emulation going on inside of your DAW, any sort of like soft synth version, plug-in version of tape emulation, you can slam that and get a similar vibe. Again, you can also just use a distortion and just kind of blend it in and mess with the EQ a bit. So all that's happening here is we're adding in some additional harmonic content and saturation. And then the Saturn is a bit involved because you can get in and actually EQ some things. You can see here our previous EQ, you can kind of see what's happening there. And you can see where the saturation is really kicking in and whatnot. So you can actually move this around and determine where you want it, but that's where it sounded good to me. So the entire signal chain for the dirty bass is, an EQ, this lovely channel strip here, the bit crusher, and the saturator at a little tiny, just kissing it, like just adjust it to taste, just starting to kiss it on the dirty bass. And let's hear the dirty bass now with all of that stuff on. All right, so let's combine the dirty bass with our clean bass, and now hear what we have. Now, I could be a bit more thorough with this. I just kind of want to go through the quick version of what it is I do. A lot of it's just basic EQing stuff. You kind of chop some things out here and there in relation to your ear and what feels best in the mix. But for me personally, I have a few go-tos and quick solutions to get things to fit right, particularly when I'm using the same bass over and over again. I know what sounds good with that bass or what EQ settings do. And if you have a bass at home, as you get used to this, you'll start to adjust to that and have settings and kind of ideas in mind for what sounds good for your bass guitars. In this instance, I'm using a G&L SB2, which is kind of a combination of Fender Jazz and a P bass, and instead of having a tone knob, your bridge pickup can be rolled in to add a tack to the P bass section. So that's what I'm using here. It's a lovely bass, sounds great. You don't have to do a ton to it, but if you want it to fit in the context of a mix, sometimes you have to do a little finagling. So here we are with this stuff. So let's hear it with just the drums and bass. Now the bass and the kick are not fighting for territory now because of the EQ choices and because I've blended in a little bit more aggression and chopped some things out in that. So let's hear it in the full mix and kind of get a feel for it. So when you're mixing these in, I tend to make sure my clean bass is the driving force of things. You want the clean to handle the low, so that's where you need to adjust things in to sound good level-wise within your mix. Then slowly start bringing in the dirt. So let's have a little bit of an example of that. So here we go. I'm going to solo this, and we'll solo the dirty bass. So you don't need a ton of it, you just want it to be present. it's there. Let's see what it sounds like in the context of the mix. All right, so that about does it for today. Hopefully these little tips and tricks were helpful for you. And please let me know what your process is in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on it. Let me know if you'd like me to do a more in-depth video on the bass I used here, or the pre-processing, like what amp and things I used going into, which was the Helix in this instance. But I can do a video on my settings there too, if you'd like. But I appreciate you watching. Always appreciate you watching. And until next time, it's been me. It's been you. This is Gear Stuff and Things. That is Earl. That is Donatello. Also, YouTube is still telling me that over 50% of you that watch these videos have yet to subscribe. Go ahead and hit that subscribe notification. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the thing. Do the thing that hits the thing that makes you be able to come back here and see more things. Gear Stuff and Things. All right. Bye.